Are we live on Zoom?
Oh yeah, is that a priority tonight?
Oh,
Hey,
it is.
make it happen.
Thank you so much. Katie, Katie, did you, Katie, I'll go grab. I know. It's a strategy. Hello and welcome to the Capitola Planning Commission meeting. This meeting is open to the public with both in-person attendance at the City of Capitola Council Chambers at 420 Capitola Avenue and remote attendance as well. Planning Commission and staff are attending in person and remotely via Zoom. There are several ways for the public to watch and participate. Information on how to join the meeting via Zoom and make public comment during the meeting is available on our website, cityofcapitola.org, on the meeting agenda. The public can also live stream the meeting on the city's website or on YouTube. As always, this meeting is cablecast live on Spectrum Communications, Cable TV Channel 8, and AT&T Uverse Channel 99, and is being recorded to be rebroadcast on the following Mondays and Fridays at 1 p.m. on Spectrum Channel 71 and Spectrum Channel 25. A recording of the meeting will also be available on the city's website after the meeting. Our technician tonight is Melissa. As a reminder, please turn off your cell phones during the meeting. Okay, so first we'll do a roll call and pledge or roll call.
Commissioner Esty. Here. Commissioner Westman. Commissioner Wilk. Here. Vice Chair Jensen. Here. And Chair Christensen.
Here.
Okay.
And the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag, United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, civil, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Do you have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No additions or deletions this evening.
Thanks. Additional materials. There's additional information submitted to the city after there's item 7A correspondence received. For additional materials?
Yes, staff received one PowerPoint presentation after the agenda was originally published, and that was added to the agenda packet and posted online and produced in the back as well.
Thank you. Okay, and item 4 is oral communications.
This evening, I just wanted to remind you, with these meetings, we often go back to the video to pull information from the Planning Commission and direction. So just trying to keep your microphone close, and if you can hear it in the background, it means you're doing a great job. So if it doesn't pick up, we can't hear what you said in the video later. So we'll take notes, but please be mindful of that. Second, there is going to be a special town hall next week, and that is on February 21st, which I believe is Wednesday, at 6 p.m. in City Council chambers. So please help us get the word out. The two buildings at the end of the wharf are in needing demolition, and we really want to engage the public and talk about next steps and where this is headed. So we're in the next year, we'll be doing a robust public outreach and discussing what will happen at the end of the wharf in the future. But just if you can help us get the word out, we'd love to have people there and collect feedback, as well as there'll be a presentation on exactly what's going on at the end of the wharf and why the buildings need to come down, as well as next steps. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, or, thank you. Oral communications.
Hi, my name is Goran Klapic. I live here locally in Sokel. I shoot baskets every day almost at Jade Street Park, where I encounter sometimes gang activity, such as gang signs being posted in the men's restroom. That's not only that one hotspot that I encountered. One time I made a call to an officer that I know personally very well when somebody painted a gang sign. I don't call it graffiti. Graffiti is very ugly. I'm from Europe. I know what graffiti art is. Somebody by Whole Foods, in the back of Whole Foods, somebody painted a gang sign there on 41st Avenue to mark the territory. That's for gang activity, always like that. So that was on my chest to begin with. I hope that one day my dear friend Sarah Ryan, she's the captain of Capitola PD department, will be the police chief, so that things can change drastically sometimes. Thank you very much for listening. Take care. God bless you. Bye bye.
Thank you. I think we took. Is there anybody else? Nope. Hearing none. I think we took care of the staff comments before the oral communications, but having no commission comments. Right, moving on to the consent calendar. There are none? Okay. Now we're moving into public hearing. Public hearings are intended to provide an opportunity for public discussion of each item listed as a public hearing. The following procedure is as follows: staff presentation, planning commission questions, public comment, planning commission deliberation, and decision. Item A is citywide zoning code update. Project description is a permit, permit number 24-0026 for future amendments to the Capitola Municipal Code Title 17 zoning. The first zoning code ordinance amendments will impact the development standards and regulations for properties citywide. The zoning code is part of the city's local coastal program. The LCP and amendments require certification by the California Coastal Commission prior to taking effect in the coastal zone. Recommended action: provide feedback to staff on zoning discussion items and direct staff to prepare an ordinance to amend Capitola Municipal Code Title 17 zoning. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll jump in. So I'm excited to introduce Ben Noble to you tonight. I think a few of you know Ben well, and Ben may be a new face for others. Ben has worked on our zoning. He worked on our general plan. He was at the last meeting via Zoom, and he's here in person tonight to lead us through some of the more difficult topics associated with the housing element update. So Ben Noble of Ben Noble Planning, welcome. And he's going to jump into the work session. And tonight will be an open dialogue. If you have any questions, feel free to raise a hand and we can answer questions. And then we'll get to certain slides where we're asking for feedback from the Planning Commission directly. So.
The microphone. Need to turn. Is this working okay? Okay, this is the microphone that works apparently. So good evening, Planning Commissioners. Again, my name is Ben Noble. Happy to be here tonight. So as Katie mentioned, I've been working for Capitola for a long time. I think over 16 years at this point, off and on. Worked on the general plan update that was adopted 10 years ago. The zoning code update adopted in 2000, and more recently, a variety of zoning code amendments, including the SB 9 ordinance, the objective standards for multi-unit residential development, and other miscellaneous zoning code amendments. I'm an independent consultant specializing in development code updates as well as general land use planning. So I'm really happy to be back in Capitola tonight to talk to you about these topics related to the zoning code update and zoning code amendments. So as you're aware, the housing element identifies a number of zoning code amendments that are necessary in order to implement the recently adopted housing element. In your packet, there's a list of all of those topics, and tonight we would like to focus on 5 of these topics to share with you some background information, and then to get your initial feedback, which we're going to then use as we draft the amendments and bring them back to you for your consideration. So on the screen are these 5 topics, and what we propose for tonight is for each of these topics, we'll give a little bit of background information, share some possible approaches to address in the zoning code amendments, and then to have a planning commission discussion for you to give us feedback that we could then use as we move forward with drafting the amendments. So with that, the first topic is missing middle housing. And there are 2 programs in the housing element related to this topic that calls for the city to develop strategies to provide for missing middle housing, and then also to allow corner lots and single-family neighborhoods to accommodate duplex units. So when we say missing middle housing, what we're talking about is smaller scale multi-unit residential development that fits in to the character of a single-family neighborhood. Here are some examples of housing types that fall within the missing middle category. So it will include duplexes, a housing type that's sometimes called a side court, where you have multiple units that are on one side of the lot with a driveway providing vehicle access on the other side. And it could be more intensive where the units are attached to one another. You can have a housing type that's called a motor court, where you might have a central driveway that provides access to units that way. And I should say that these images on the screen come from a resource prepared by AMBAG that identifies infill housing types within Santa Cruz County to be a resource for jurisdictions to use when they're thinking about lower intensity residential infill within communities in the region. And so given that's what missing middle housing is, as referred to in the housing element, the question then is, well, is missing middle housing currently allowed in Capitola? And so on the screen is a zoning map showing the zoning districts within the city. And so within the R1 zone, in your single family zoning district, you can have one primary dwelling. You can have a primary dwelling with an ADU, but you can also have 2 primary dwelling units per lot under SB 9, which is the state law that requires jurisdictions to allow for 2 primary dwelling units on a single lot within a single family zoning district, provided that the unit meets specified criteria within the state law, as well as any locally adopted ordinance, which Capitola does have. So it's important to keep in mind that already within the R1 zoning district, some of these missing middle type or missing middle housing typologies are already permitted. Some of you may recall that when the city adopted the SB 9 ordinance, we were looking at what is required under state law and how best to accommodate that within Capitola. So on the screen are some of the diagrams that we used with this work. So on the left here is a typical 5,500 square foot lot. And under SB 9, the city needs to allow a lot split and then 2 primary dwelling units on each of those lots, with those units being up to 1,200 square feet. So you can see the resulting density on a project like that if one were to be proposed, is 32 dwelling units per acre, so relatively dense. As you know, in Capitola, there are residential lots that are smaller than 5,500 square feet in some of your neighborhoods. And so in those cases, the city still needs to allow up to 4 units with a lot split. And the densities can get pretty high in that case. So as dense as 62 dwelling units per acre with 700 square feet per unit, if there were to be an SB9 project on a lot, that's 2,800 square feet. So that's currently what's allowed in the R1 zoning district under SB9. So moving into the multifamily zones, was there a question?
How do setbacks come into play when we look at that, like that illustration, right?
So the city is required to accept 4-foot setbacks from the side and rear property lines.
In the front?
Front can be what the city has, but in our ordinance, we found, or in our studies for the ordinance, we found that we could accommodate the required 4 units with a front setback on larger lots, but on smaller lots, that becomes infeasible. So the city had to make some trade-offs. And what the city ultimately decided is that it would rather accommodate the on-site parking with the units moved up to the front without a front setback. It was a trade-off. The city couldn't accomplish everything that it wanted to under state law. So ultimately, city council decided that this was preferred.
So on the smaller lots, didn't we go to 3 stories?
Or 2.5, I think.
2.5.
We did.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the R1 zone. Has there been any SB9 applications in the city? One.
Yeah, we've had inquiries, but one that came through. So in Depot Hill.
So that's the R1 zoning district. And then there's the multifamily zone, so the RM. And on the screen is just a summary of the development standards that apply within the RM zoning districts. And I think the most important is the parcel area per unit and the density. They're both sort of related to one another. So in the RML, allowed 10 dwelling units per acre. In the RMM, you're allowed 15 dwelling units per acre. And the RMH, you're allowed 20 dwelling units per acre. And that maximum density is the primary standard that dictates what kind of multifamily, multi-unit residential development is possible within these areas.
And just to jump in for a minute, you'll recall we had a lot of examples in our housing element of different densities. And these numbers are much lower than some of the developments we have in town that go up to 40 dwelling units per acre and in the 30s along Park Avenue, the larger buildings. So
just as a frame of reference, a typical townhome development, sort of with modern parking provisions, is about 12 dwelling units per acre. A typical sort of garden style 2-story apartment might be 28 dwelling units per acre. Okay, so it's interesting to compare the development standards in the RM zones to these missing middle typologies that we were looking at before. So looking at the AMBAG prototypes that they prepared for the infill design toolkit, most of these would not be possible within the RM zoning district. So a duplex on a smaller lot wouldn't be allowed in RML and RMM. Detached side court, detached motor court. Can't see with this thing down here. Also would not be allowed in the minimum. I can live with it. Oh, hide. All right. And then also the 4-unit development that would be allowed under SB9 in larger R1 zoning districts, that also would not be allowed in all of the RM districts because of the density limitation. So for us, that sort of raises some questions that we would like Planning Commission feedback on. Given what the housing element says about exploring, allowing for missing middle housing in Capitola, as well as allowing for duplexes on corner lots within the R1 zone, Katie and I see a number of options to consider that we'd like your feedback on. So in the R1 zone, one option is to just continue to only rely on SB9, to not go any further from that and just leave it as it is. Another option would be to allow duplex homes on all corner lots subject to the same development standards as a single family home. So within that development envelope that's allowed in R1 for a single family home, to say, okay, as long as the duplex fits within that development envelope and provides for two primary dwelling units rather than one, that would be allowed. And then a third option, which is sort of a middle ground between those two, is to say that, okay, on lots that meet the minimum lot size standard of 5,000 square feet on a corner lot, okay, you can do duplex there. But on smaller corner lots, say in neighborhoods where typical lot sizes are non-conforming and smaller than 5,000, you wouldn't be able to do a duplex. Instead, if you wanted more than one primary dwelling unit on that lot, you would need to rely on SB9 and the size limitations that come with that.
Question, actually, two questions.
Okay.
One is, so the feedback from HCD was we don't have enough middle housing, and yet you just pointed out all these areas where we do, and SB9 activity that we can allow. So what are we missing? Where are we falling short in terms of the housing element? I don't get it.
So I think you're absolutely correct. We have a lot of options in our R1 right now from SB9 and ADUs. So this is to allow duplexes within our R1 zone, which currently they'd be limited in terms of like a single family home with a ADU or else an SB9 development, which has a maximum square footage. But a duplex would, the way that this is set up, would be subject to the single family home standards. So if you're on a 5,000 square foot lot and you could build a 2,400 square foot duplex, kind of an incentive rather than going the SB9 route where the units have to be smaller. So
SB9 would limit you to the parcel being split with the two 800 square foot units on each parcel. Is that right?
So the SB9, you could, on one lot, you could develop two primary homes, but they're limited in their square footage. Or you can go even further and subdivide the lot and have two single family homes on each lot. So yeah, adding the duplex under option 2 would provide an incentive not to go the SB9 route, because you could have a home that's a regular size that functions as a duplex.
We went through and wait, so you wouldn't have to split the lot. You could just say, okay, I'm just building a duplex on my lot, and I'm not invoking SB9. And
right. Yep.
And again, HCD said you don't have enough incentive for this middle housing, these options.
This would be one more incentive in our toolbox. So it would be in our land use table where we list single family as a permitted use. We would have duplex as a permitted use with a note that says on corner lots only. I mean, you could go further and say, we'd like to allow duplexes on all lots in the single family zone. But this is what we committed to in the housing element update, was to look at corner lots for duplexes.
So you had a dialogue with the HCD, I'm assuming, and they said you need more middle housing. And you said, well, SB9 is one way to do it. And they said, well, that's not really an incentive. And duplexes came up and they said, well, yeah, if you had more duplexes or then maybe we approve it or something.
Yeah,
Worked.
HCD told us we need to go beyond what the state has allowed. So this is us creating our own land use allotment within the R1. So when we got our comments from HCD, it was that we need to go beyond what, because we said, well, we've already got SB9 and we've got all the ADUs and we're up to date, and this is us going beyond.
And we identified some lots in our housing element that we called out that could be duplexes. Was that correct?
On corner lots, yep.
And then how does that work from like selling standpoint? You know, duplexes a lot of times are sold not as one unit.
It would be one ownership. We wouldn't set it up that it could be condoed, so it would just be, unless the planning commission wanted them to be able to be sold separately, but it would, for a property owner, there'd be one owner and they could rent both units.
And then how does the parking requirements work? Does it differ between a duplex or a single family home?
Yep. A duplex requires 2 spaces per unit. A single family home, it depends on the square footage of the unit.
So I'm lost a little bit on the math when you say it's an advantage to do this. Go back to page 14 on a 2,800 square foot lot. 2 units end up being 1,400 per unit. If we use SB9, that basically you fill up the lot with houses. And if we adopt this rule saying corner lots need to use the standard residential R1 requirements for FAR, don't those duplexes end up being smaller than these 1,400 square foot things? So why would I want to do that if I'm maximizing my floor area, which most people try to do? A little lost on the map.
Okay, so you're at the top right, 2 units, 2,800 square foot lot.
Remind me what your FAR is for an R1?
I'm going to look that up right now.
The only one I know is 4,000 square feet is 0.56, but it's scaled. So I was trying to do that one to see if it was feasible. That ends up being 1,120 per duplex on a corner lot that's 4,000 square feet, which we, I think, have a fair number of those, kind of following up on Jerry's comment about what's the opportunity here. I don't know how many corner lots we have that are like 5,000 square foot variety.
So if the maximum FAR, and if, let's just for like, keep it simple in our heads, a 5,000 square foot lot, maximum FAR of approximately 0.5. So 25.
It's like 0.58 or something.
0.58 for the 2,800.
2,500. So total, just in my mind, to keep it simple, 2,500. So say approximately 1,200, 500. Okay. So maybe a little bit, they could maybe achieve a little bit more floor area under a traditional duplex as opposed to an SB9 project. I think that the city, there would be advantages from the city's perspective to see a duplex rather than an SB9 unit, because they would have to comply with the minimum setback requirements. And so if somebody were to take that option rather than the SB9 option for whatever reason, I think we would want that. We would prefer that because of the buildings being set back a little bit.
Right, but we're trying to.
And the increased parking. So under SB9, we have to accept 1 parking unit, 1 parking space per unit. Whereas with a traditional duplex, depending on the size of the floor area, you require 2 spaces per unit.
Yep.
From the applicants or the city's perspective? So SB9 has to be approved through a ministerial process. So it would be much less expensive and much quicker process for now.
I'm just trying to understand why anyone would want to go the duplex route.
So one thing is you're limited to 16 feet in height, 20 if you, for one-story building. Two-story building has to have a plate height of 20 feet. So you can get the 25 feet within the R1. You can build to the regular standards, but I was just looking up what the square footage requirements are.
SB9.
SB9, yeah. So if you have up to 2 units, it's 1,200 square feet each, but then once you go to 3 units, it drops down to 800 square feet each. But I see your point, Paul, of on a smaller lot, SB9 is probably more advantageous than a duplex in terms of the math.
So,
Setback.
yeah, when we heard from HCD, did they just want this middle housing in the R1 district? Or do they want it citywide? Because it seems like we have a lot of opportunities in our multi-residential districts to come up with situations where we could add more middle housing.
So both.
Oh,
Yeah, they did ask us specifically, we're supposed to look at duplexes on corner lots for the R1, but then we're also supposed to look at our density limits within our multifamily. So we could come back with options for the duplex. That's kind of, I guess one question for the planning commission is, would you prefer to see duplexes on corner lots rather than SB9 development that can come closer to the street, have minimal setbacks? Because we could look at what the incentives are there and try to make it more advantageous than the SB9.
Is in terms of the drainage issue that we're talking about, I think our last work session with parcel splits. I mean, there's nothing, you're considering the entire parcel when you're doing a parcel split to then decide which tier you're falling under. When we do just straight duplex, I mean, that's not considering that type of tiered drainage, right? So I mean, would that be an advantage for the applicant? They don't have to go through when they go through SB9, they would have to go through all the drainage evaluation, but with the parcel, the duplex, would that be a factor?
Yeah, we would look at it for both, but most likely they wouldn't
Tier it out.
become a tier 2 or tier 3 if it's just essentially the same development as a single family home.
Yeah.
So that would be an advantage as well.
I mean, for me, we talked about this before. I think duplexes on corner lots make so much sense. And, it seems like that one is sort of a no-brainer for the city to do that. It's just, how do we figure out a way to do it where there is some incentive for people to do the duplex rather than the SB9? Because if you build a building that looks basically like, the same size as a single family house, it's going to go there, but you'd let it be 2 units. I mean, that really doesn't have much of an impact on the neighborhood.
What's the maximum size of an ADU? Hello?
Is it, I think it's,
I'd say like.
depends on how many bedrooms you have.
Right, well, a 2-bedroom ADU at 1,200 square feet, which can be attached to your house, would be just like a duplex that we're talking about because it can't be sold anyway.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, this is very similar to all the other solutions that are out there, but it's something new and it goes beyond what's required by state law.
I think the only other thing would be to look at is by site specific. I mean, I agree with Susan's comment on corner lots, but usually on a corner lot, you get to an intersection. If you're having a curb cut for a new parking at 20 feet, on a corner, and you already, it's already struggling with that. It's just something to be interesting to see what site by site. I mean, because if we approve this on all corner lots, then it kind of takes the evaluation of if that's safe or whatever kind of out of the hands of the city, right? I mean, it would just be automatic.
No, we could review these with a design permit. So I do think we should put some objective standards in there as well. One would be definitely for parking lot, like the parking access, maybe suggesting that they only have one driveway cut, but if they do two, that they be a certain distance from the intersection. The other is like, just how the building faces, where the entrance is relative to facing the street, so it looks like single family is from both. But that would be something we could get into the details on if there's general support to go with option 2, and then we'll come back with some objective standards to try to make it fit.
Most duplexes that you see set up, and they usually have parking on like entrances for both sides. I mean, they are clearly defined, so that'd just be interesting in some
Seems,
corner residential lots.
seems like one of the difficulties we have is we do have some little, very small lots. And so would they be upset if we went to, allowing duplexes on corner lots that are, say, 3,200 square feet or, some number in there that becomes workable? And I don't know exactly what it would be. But then we would have, I mean, we don't want to see a duplex try and go on, I think there's some 1,000 square foot lots in my neighborhood. And, I mean, I can think of the one on the corner of Riverview and Blue Gum there. I don't think that lot's even 1,000 square feet. So I think we need to have some minimum standard in there, certainly not 5,000 square feet, but something in the 3,200 square foot range.
Many of our lots are 40 by 80, and I'm actually going to look toward Sean right now because I know Sean does a lot of mapping for us. And I think a 40 by 80 would cover most of, not all of our lots, but I think that would be a good cutoff point. But I'm just
Yeah.
looking to Sean to see if he agrees or if he thinks it should be a little bit lower. Okay, so 40 to 70 and 40 to 80 are 40 by 80, 40 by 70. So 3,200 or else 2,800. So it'd be,
I would be happy with the 3,200 if that works for other people.
I don't necessarily have too much of a problem with the minimum size lot. I think near Pleasure Point, there's a lot of small lots that people have very small duplexes on that are just little surf shacks, and it seemed to work out all right. But I mean, they still have to adhere to setbacks and all that other development standards, design standards, right? So even if they had a small lot, they would still have to, they can't just build directly to zero lot line.
correct. Yeah, there would be no like guaranteed allowance with this. SB9 has a guaranteed allowance that they can move into certain areas if they can't quite fit the development.
It would just be a shame if somebody had, just under the threshold and they didn't want to go through the full SB9 and they were beholden to kind of the subjective that we didn't necessarily intend to address them.
So I'm hearing with option 2 under Chair Christensen's opinion would be the best, and then under Commissioner Westman, option 3, but having a 3,200 square foot minimum for the lot size. And if the rest of you could weigh in on that, that'd be fantastic.
So I'm still confused, basically on Paul's point. So the duplex, are there instances where you would opt for a duplex where you'd have a larger floor area ratio than SB9?
On a larger lot, yes. On a small lot, no.
Just
Okay.
to add to that, there are other eligibility criteria for SB9 having to do with recent rental history of the units. And so there may be some instances where SB9 is just not possible on a lot, but a typical duplex.
So with regards to then the small lots, the duplex doesn't buy you anything. You could always default to SB9, but you're saying on the larger lots, we would then go with a duplex. They, it would be advantageous to go like on the corner lot on a large lot to have a duplex because you could get more floor area ratio than if you went at the SB9 route.
Correct. So up in Cliffwood Heights, corner lot, 6,000 square feet, you'd get more square
So
footage.
your concern about the small lots doesn't apply.
Mm. They could try the SB9 route, but might not always work.
Sorry for my confusion, but it seems like option 2 covers it. Because if the duplex makes sense on only the larger lots and on smaller lots, they can just default to SB9 to get the FAR that they're looking for. And we don't need to go option 3 because option 2 just adds the middle housing, fills in that gap we're missing. Kinda, maybe.
Yeah, and option 2, if they came in with a duplex, it would at least come before the planning commission on a small lot, whereas SB9, it's administrative review by staff and it's subject to so it could get, closer to the setbacks. And so there's,
You're just opening up options. All the,
Because that's just weird to see a word of all corner lots. I mean, so there's every corner lot could be subject.
Yeah, but the reality is, I mean, if you do the math on the small lots, you're gonna end up with like 600 square feet each duplex, right? Because of our standards. And nobody's gonna do that. Well, I would assume most people would not do that if they had another route to get something with a bigger FAR. So I'm okay with option 2, and as Peter said, just let them figure out if they need to go the SB9 route and go through all the hoops.
okay, our tech,
It's
our,
sort of-
Fine with me. I
It's
just
sort of limiting.
our tech is concerned that the mics aren't picking up. So just a reminder to bring your mic nice and close.
I mean, option 2 works fine for me as well. I just think it's going to create some expectations that aren't going to be able to be fulfilled.
We've heard from all commissioners on the R1 missing middle, and then there's the question of missing middle housing in the RM zoning districts. And this is maybe part of a larger discussion about allowed density within the RM zoning districts, but just focusing narrowly on the missing middle question, given that existing development regulations prohibit a lot of these missing middle housing types within our RM zoning districts. One potential zoning code amendment would be to modify the RM development standards to allow these projects, and that would likely include some kind of increase to building coverage, maybe not a lot, but probably some. But most significantly, a reduction in the minimum parcel area per unit, as well as an increase in the maximum density. So we're interested in Planning Commission reaction to this.
And I'll just remind you for that RML at 4,400 square feet, our single family zone is at 5,000. So it's really low. There's almost no difference, 600 square feet. parcel size. So does anyone have any questions on how this works? Like for the low density, for each unit, you have to have 4,400 square feet of land area. And then medium density, it's 2,500, and then high density is 22.
For me, I could live with an increase in the building coverage. 40%'s pretty low. And I could also reduce the parcel size, particularly in the RM low. It seems like that number could come down. And then as a result of those, the density is going to increase.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's possible, but could you give us, go back to page 8 and look at those duplexes? They look like the real pictures, so they're real somewhere. You have any idea, Ben, what those numbers would be, equivalent numbers would be in this locale?
Okay, so house on the bottom is on probably a 4,000 square foot, 100 by 40, yeah, 4,000 square foot lot. So 2 units there. So to minimum lot size of 2,000 square feet per unit. And then the top is probably a slightly larger lot.
Looks like it. So, yeah, they've reduced the size,
Mhm.
parcel size, effectively the parcel size.
If
I'm-
you'd like, I can pull up the densities from our general plan that we presented prior, just to give you an idea of, would that be helpful? This will not be on Zoom, but I don't know how many people are watching.
Need to stop.
Okay. Well, just to give you, I could talk you through some of these if you want to pull up your slides, or you could go to the general line. But like Bay Avenue, 750 Bay Avenue, the senior housing is at 22 dwelling units per acre. So that would be high density. Jade Street and Ruby Court area, it's at 22.8 dwelling units per acre. So the development right across from the Jade Street Park. The Villas of Capitola, 925 46th Avenue, are at 23 dwelling units per acre. 900 Capitola Avenue, I think that's the mansion,
Mhm.
and that's at 25 dwelling units per acre. All right, so at 25 dwelling units per acre, you're already beyond what can be done in any of our at high density. Opal Cliff Drive, the smaller units, or the Opal Cliff Drive right at the corner after you go over Stockton Bridge, the 2 big condos are at 28.8 dwelling units per acre. The Beach Villas, 1066 41st Avenue, right next to the rail trail, are they're at 29 dwelling units per acre. So I don't know if that's helpful to know what ranges you'd be comfortable with for the high, if something should be able to be developed up to the Beach Villa density of almost 30 units per acre, or
I think one example that's often used is, there are 2 projects in town that were developed by the same developer. The one over on Ruby Court, Jade Street area, those sort of fourplexes in there. And when they got developed, there was a pretty big outcry in town at that point that they were way too dense, not what Capitola wanted. And they were working on the project up on Kennedy, Capitola Knolls, I think it's called at the same time. So they greatly, that's where this 40% and I think 4,400 square feet came up at that time, because I think that's what that project is developed at. So for me, the unknown in what we can't control is the design, because like the Bay Avenue Seniors Project, that works great there. And, you know, that density doesn't bother me at all. I do think that, you know, sort of the Fourplex project over on Ruby Court in that area, that seems more cluttered and dense, even though it's not. But definitely we could raise our densities.
Yeah. And always when we're thinking about raising densities, there's also the acknowledging that there's the state density bonus. So whatever we raise them to, they can always go higher if it's an affordable project. So, okay, well, we'll take a look at that. The Ruby Court project, and I think you're right about the design, has a lot to do with the outcomes. So that's at 22, almost 23 dwelling units per acre. The Villas of Capitola are at 24, that's 925 46th Avenue. But I think the one up the street that's at 25 dwelling units per acre. That's the at 900 Capitola Avenue. So that's actually right on the corner, which is different. It's like an apartment building, one building. They've got some open space around it, and so in drafting this, I wish maybe you could pull up our website just so they can take a look.
I think for me, it's going to be sort of hard tonight to say, well, that number should go up to from 10 to 17%, because we really, you know, don't have too many examples of that. You know, maybe we can get a consensus that we think, you know, the numbers can go up. There can be more density in the multifamily zone. And when they come back, you can give us some examples and we can sort of choose between those examples. Because I think tonight we could waste a lot of time trying to figure out something that we don't really understand.
And that was exactly our expectation, just sort of the green light that the Planning Commission is open to exploring increased densities. And if that's the case, we'll come back with more information.
Yeah, and all of our examples are beyond 20
Yeah.
dwelling units per acre, so we'll bring some lower ones for you too. Okay.
I can't actually see my. This as a set of. So are we ready to move on to the next topic? Okay. So the next topic is alternative housing types. So there's a program in the housing element to review and revise as appropriate the zoning code to facilitate alternative housing types. And the housing element provides some examples of alternative housing types, including SROs, live work, micro units, and co-housing. So just, a few definitions. So single room occupancy, SRO, means a single room dwelling unit with limited food preparation or sanitary facilities. So usually with some shared kitchen or bathroom facility for residents, and typically 4,000 square feet or less for the unit. And there are some local examples such as El Centro in Santa Cruz, and then Over the Hill in San Jose. Here's an example. This is actually transitional housing for persons experiencing homelessness, whereas in Santa Cruz, this is more permanent housing in the SRO units. So that's one example of a alternative housing type. Co-housing is another, where you have residences with some sort of shared indoor and outdoor space, really focused on creating a interdependent community life. And there are some local examples as well, Coyote Crossing in Santa Cruz, as well as the New Brighton co-housing. So private residences plus shared facilities for residents within the development. Micro units. Micro units are distinguished from SRO units in that they are completely self-contained units with complete kitchen and bathroom facilities. And these small units are typically 350 square feet or less. And the recently approved Center Street project in Santa Cruz has some micro units as part of the project. And then in Berkeley, we see a lot of micro units as well. And you see a lot of them as well in San Francisco and other sort of much higher density intensity areas. And so this is actually a plan view of a micro unit in Berkeley. Here is a photograph of unit. I think this is about 300 square feet. Okay, and then live work. It is a space that contains both a residence and a place of work for one or more of the residents of the unit. And we have examples locally, the Tannery in Santa Cruz, as well as Swift Street in Santa Cruz. These are live work units focused on artists and artisans. Okay, so we're looking for some preliminary planning commission input on what, if anything, the zoning code should do to promote these different types of alternative housing. So on the slide, I for SROs, there's what the existing code says. And so currently an SRO is allowed in Capitola. It's classified as group housing, which includes other types of group housing like dormitories. And it's permitted in the RM, it's sort of a by right use, and requires a CUP in the MUN and in the village. So if the city wanted to do more to promote SROs, what is possible is the city could define SROs as sort of separate from other types of group housing, could allow this use as a permitted use in the mixed use zones, and could establish additional objective standards as needed, given that that use would then become sort of by right and wouldn't be subject to the usual conditional use permit process. So that's for SROs. And I have similar slides for other alternative housing types. Do you want to talk about SROs now, or do you want to see similar information about the other alternative housing types?
I'd like to see the information of the four housing types, and then we can talk about them, because then we can sort of know what we're talking about.
Okay, I'll proceed with the others. Okay, so for co-housing, currently your zoning code is silent on co-housing. And if the city wanted to, in the zoning code, do more to promote co-housing, what you could do is you could define co-housing development, have a definition of this use type, identify this as a permitted use in the R1 and the RM zones, so that there's no confusion or discrepancy about whether this is a permitted use or not.
So is it a typical co-housing situation like a senior center? Where there's a central dining area and then they all have their own units? Is that an example or is that something separate?
So that would be something separate, but it would be, I guess, a somewhat similar situation, but without any kind of age restriction.
Can I ask, I don't know if you have access to this information off the top of your research, but is there any danger in the city promoting these types of housing units as opposed to duplexes or, you know, the more, I don't want to say independent, maybe like more like the micro units where you have fully independent, not co-housing and not so highly densified that where there's shared space. Is there any thought to increasing crime or increase in just, I mean, maybe that's not desirable for people to live in those types of situations, so they would opt for another type. Do you kind of maybe, am I being clear? I'm just, if we devoted a portion of the city to say co-housing, we had a developer come in and make a bunch of co-housing and people just decided that's not their thing, and they were to have opted to do something more independent. Do you see anything going on like that? Is it usually highly occupied? I don't know if I'm asking a really clear question. I'm sorry. I'm just wondering because
Well, I actually have some similar thoughts. It's like when it talks about the micro housing, I think that's fabulous. And I think that would work really well here in Capitola. I look at the single room occupancy and I'm going, I don't really see how that works here because there aren't places, people would have to go out and eat all their meals out somewhere because there's no kitchen. You know,
The one behind the house, the apartment, the situation exactly behind my house is one of those. It is a bunch of units in a shared kitchen facility in one.
right, co-housing works for me. I don't have a problem.
just curious.
That's why I'm asking what co-housing really means. I would clarify that as single room occupancies. They each have their own room and they share a kitchen. That's what I call.
But what I heard Ben say is there is no kitchen facility provided in the single room occupancy units.
There's a shared kitchen.
Like a
Shared kitchen in the single room occupancy. So just as Paul was, it's
Okay.
very similar, right? There's the shared kitchen.
Yeah, so
sometimes
within
shared bath.
SRO, there's some sort of shared kitchen and or bathroom facilities. An SRO unit might have a little hot plate, for example, and a toilet, but then the shower is in a shared area and a more complete kitchen is in a shared area.
Okay, so I misunderstood.
It's slightly better than a dormitory.
It depends on how you look at it.
I guess what my question was is that if this was a large section of housing, would it be utilized and enjoyed by the demographic or by the public in Capitola?
So right now, someone could come into Capitola and apply for a co-housing project and they would have it could be any of these like townhouse developments we see, and they would just have some aspect of that that's shared. Like they usually have like a garden shed that has shared gardening tools and then a community center where they share a meal. So very similar. I think one aspect of the co-housing, I know the New Brighton co-housing, it's a condo, so you can actually own your unit and then you're vested in this communal aspect of it. And I think at the New Brighton co-housing, you can opt whether or not you want to participate in community dinners or participate. So, but if someone were to come in with a co-housing application today, we wouldn't turn them away. It would be allowed, but it's just for the purposes of the code, we could call it out as an allowed use. So
Identified.
it's identified. Yeah, a little more
It's
clear.
more of a promotion thing as opposed to, because that's what I keep struggling with as well, is like what in the code forbids any of this? And the answer seems to be, well, nothing really, but what we're trying to do is in the housing element, show that we are proactive in promoting these kinds of units.
Yes, for some of these. So I'm going to get these confused now, but the micro unit, that's correct. We don't have a density limit. A developer could come in with these small micro units. They just have to have sleeping accommodations, a kitchen, and a bathroom, and that can be one unit.
So we don't have any like limitations on number of kitchens per unit or something currently in the code. That would be controlled perhaps by SoCal Water or something like that, but
We do have a limit on how many kitchens you can have, but a unit must have a kitchen, it must have cooking and sleeping facilities.
and we don't control the number of those units. So
Correct. Yeah. Except we control the number of the units in our multifamily zone. We have no density limits in our commercial mixed use, but within the multifamily, we have a density limit of how many units.
So one of the things that's happened in the last years, I know there's several buildings in Capitola Village where they had small, sort of very small studio units. And all of those units used to provide housing for people who worked in the village. And they've all been converted to vacation rental units. So is it possible for us to have some restriction if we built something like, a single room occupancy, that it doesn't turn into, places that get rented for vacation rentals?
I think there is multifamily in like the Fanmar neighborhood within so the only place you can do vacation rental is down in the village. And there is multifamily along the hill over here. So we could probably put some standards in there that if you're going to do multifamily.
I thought there was a deed restriction that came along with, ADUs right now,
With ADUs, yes.
but not.
Yeah. But we could do something similar probably for SROs. If we wanted to define it and call out like the smaller units could not be rented, but
Because I think if we're going to go that route, we want them for housing, not vacation opportunities.
And did the deed restriction get removed on the ADUs?
just portions of it about owner occupancy. But other than that, there's still deed restrictions on ADUs.
So we've moved into discussing these. Should I continue with these? Okay. All right. So micro units. So currently the zoning code is silent on micro units. It would just be treated as multifamily or mixed use if it was part of a mixed use project. But there is a minimum unit size in the building code that is 220 square feet per unit, I believe. And so if the city wanted to do more to promote micro units, it could define micro units in the zoning code and specifically call it out as an allowed use in certain locations where the city wanted to promote smaller units and higher intensity development. So that might be in the CR zoning district around the metro. For example, currently there is no density limitation in CR. So you don't have to worry about that, but sort of calling it out is, like Commissioner Wilk mentioned, sort of a way to promote this alternative housing type. There may be the need to relax certain development standards to accommodate this much higher intensity type of housing. And then there's also a question about in the RM zoning districts, are there any locations where the city would want to promote these micro units? And if so, that would require some sort of alternative density standard or an exception to the density standard, because these units are so small, they would likely exceed the density of the RM zoning district. So we're interested in planning commission
Do
thoughts on
that, you'd have to define what a micro unit is.
You would need to.
Size, I guess. How you would do that.
300 square feet, I thought.
Yeah, I think it would.
Of so many square feet, I'm sorry.
Yes, that's what.
And
Okay.
why not also in the CR and CC? Why wouldn't we do both?
Our thinking is that the CR, because of the mall redevelopment, and the transit center becomes sort of the highest intensity area along the 41st Avenue corridor. Okay, and then two more. So live work, currently zoning code is silent on this. I think that if an applicant came in today wanting to have sort of some workspace within a residence, that the city would treat it as a mixed use project, and zoning wise would be okay. Building code, another story. But if the city wanted to do more to promote live work, it could be called out as a permitted use in the mixed use and commercial zoning districts. Maybe some development standards would need to be adjusted, such as waiving the parking for the non-residential uses, for example. And there might be other development standards that might need to be adjusted as well, if this is a development type that the city sees as, being desirable and worthy of promotion. And then the last alternative housing type is what you might call employee or workforce housing. So an example might be an affordable housing project that's reserved for employees of the school district, for example. And this sort of housing type, of course, is currently allowed in the city. But if the city wanted to do more to sort of promote this sort of thing, that maybe the community benefit program would be a way to do that, to specifically call that out as sort of an available benefit that could be used for granting the increased intensity. So those are the.
I just have one quick question about the single room occupancy. We had the project for the assisted living on Capitola Road. And basically that was a single room occupancy with a common kitchen where they served people meals and stuff, but we were told that does not count as housing. Right?
That's correct. It's a really good point. So
Was
the
it-
one kitchen, it was the fact that the rooms didn't have kitchens. So that's something we should look into. With this assisted living project, there was one, they're cooking for the residents. And if they had added kitchens to each room, they would have counted towards our RENA, but they don't count towards the RENA because it's more of a.
Yeah. In senior housing, there's you have like more independent living that's clearly a residential use. And then in the continuum of care, you get to more assisted living or skilled nursing, where it becomes more of a sort of a medical facility that is of a residential nature. And then that affects the way that the state sort of allows jurisdictions to count housing element purposes.
And, sorry.
We have a few group homes in Capitola, like transitional housing, and those would count as one unit, not,
Right.
we wouldn't count the per bedroom.
I just want to make certain if we do single room occupancy, that we have units that are going to count toward our housing numbers.
Right. You want credit for those.
Yeah.
On the workforce, can you go back to the slide?
Can I ask one last question about that last point real fast? With the senior living, especially, this is all addressing affordable housing as it incorporates the missing middle, right? So with the senior housing that's proposed, he wasn't really suggesting that he's going to be within that bracket of affordability, right?
No, they weren't going to be.
No.
affordable.
Right, so it would just count towards RENA. It was just, I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, it would not have counted towards RENA, and there was no affordable.
So no community benefit overall. Okay, thank you.
On the workforce housing, here's my question around that. Would there be then criteria set up for what workforce housing is and like who qualifies for that?
Yes. So if we were to do something like this, we would clearly define, okay, in order to sort of qualify as a community benefit, you would need to do X, Y, and Z things. So we would define exactly what that means.
But limited to Soquel Unified.
No, no, no. That's just meant as an example. It could be other types of employee workforce housing. And if the planning commission is interested in this, we would sort of work out some of those details and bring that back to you for further discussion.
And not to belabor that, but what's the enforcement on something like that? I mean, somebody's right at that threshold and then they get a step raise and now they're, how have you seen that work in the past?
I was going to say, this is really tied to the place that they work and not their income level. I mean, it'd be great to get something with a school district or, but it would be tied to the workforce. So it's okay if their pay is higher. It's really looking at trying to decrease VMTs and have a local workforce live close by. So it's not so much an incentive for affordability as it is to have people live close to where they work.
So this would be some sort of promotional thing where, like, for example, if it was the Soquel School District, as part of their hiring practices or whatever, they would say there is this promotional opportunity that we've dealt with the city of Capitola to provide teacher housing, and and here's the program, here's for sure how it all works, and and that's a recruiting opportunity for them. Is that
Yeah,
how we're
I think
imagining
school
this?
districts view, subsidize housing as a very important teacher recruitment and retention strategy in high school.
Okay.
But when the mall development came in 2019, there was discussion about, can you provide workforce housing? There were a couple council members that were interested in that. So we did have some discussions actually with Soquel Unified Elementary, I think a couple of the local hospitals, as well as Cabrillo College, to see if they'd be interested. And it becomes a partnership where the school, say if it was Cabrillo, is actually like investing in the mall development into an apartment building for their employees. So there's an exchange of money and they become the landlord essentially. And
So if you were to include this as part of the housing element, would you have to pre-coordinate any of that? To convince the HCD that, yeah, we reached out to the hospitals and school board and they've shown some interest, and I'm just wondering how.
Well, other
Or-
communities are doing, there was even on the radio this morning, Santa Clara was crowing about how they did this and they're on their third teacher housing project, the third in one county. The county basically, exactly what you're saying, the county owns, I believe they own or they're leasing the facility and then they're turning around and leasing back to the school district. So I don't think HCD is going to complain if we do this. I think it's really a good idea. Personally,
Just trying to understand it.
really incentivize.
yeah, that's what we're trying to get at is, do we want to, one, do we like this idea? And two, to make it economically viable, do we want to incentivize it? So for the example of the mall, they're going to want to get the highest and best use out of that property when they build their housing. But if we incentivize this somehow, that there's more incentive for local workforce housing, then they might engage in the conversation if it works out for their bottom line.
I'd be okay with it.
And there's new state regulations around the school districts and they can build on their properties, but this gives another opportunity.
Saw the MGP letter where they were complaining about our insistence on all this affordable housing stuff. This is one way sort of around that, because it's not necessarily affordable housing, even kind of is, because the county or the school district or whatever is basically paying for it one way or the other. So it's a relatively easy thing to do. Sorry.
I don't know if your mic is picking up, is it?
I mean, I think it's a good way to incentivize MGP to add some of this to that mall project. Personally, I think that would be good.
I've got another question on a different topic.
Okay.
Just-
I think for this one, am I seeing support? Okay, what's the other topic?
The live work. So, you're talking about commercial, not requiring a commercial use permit now to have someone work in their home. They start an auto shop in their garage, and now that's just okay.
No, not yet. So we wouldn't set it up that way. That would be a home occupancy permit. So if you're thinking of a single family home, someone's doing a shop out of their garage and they're working within the rules and regulations for home occupancy, that's your single family home. This is more live work, would be multifamily. It's actually like allowed right now within our commercial zone as mixed use, but we would be defining it and possibly one advantage I would suggest if we were to do a live work in our mixed use zones is to acknowledge that the people that live there work there, and we would allow a decrease in parking because they're not. Because we typically would calculate the square footage of the commercial area, the square footage of the residential, and count it all twice. But if it's a true live work, you'd decrease the overall parking, and that would be the one incentive in the zone. But this is essentially allowed. One question for the planning commission would be, would you want this? I don't think you would want live work in your multifamily zones. You wouldn't want to introduce commercial into areas where you have multifamily.
So give me an example again of the live work. You have a multifamily, but there'd be a common, what, laundry or something? What?
Have you been to the tannery in Santa Cruz? The tannery
Yes.
right off of Highway 9, there's a dance studio, there's art studios, and then most of those units that are there, the artists work at the tannery, and or a certain percentage, I think, of those units are live work.
The
There.
sort of traditional live work is an artist's loft where an artist lives in the space and it's also the artist's workspace as well. And it differs from, say, a home occupation in that there could be more commercial activity going on there, such as sort of customers coming to.
And so would you or would you not need a commercial use permit to create that live work tannery or whatever it is?
You would need a commercial permit at the tannery because they have actual galleries. The public can come in and buy goods. They also have like dance studios and teach dance lessons. So you would be required to have a business license. Theaters, yeah.
Just wondering in terms of, some very noisy or obtrusive business that, an artist or a dance studio may be very, sound great, but like I say, if it's an auto shop with a guy or, whatever, just trying to explore the edges of this.
Yeah, there's permutations here in what you could do. You could continue to require a CUP for this use, but like Katie was explaining, waive the parking or the non-residential use just to remove some of the barriers to this.
So if we were to do that, but still require the CUP, so it would come before us and we could say, oh, well, wait a minute, no, this isn't what we had in mind. We could still deny that.
Yes.
Would that be administratively then?
We could set it up as a conditional use permit, so it wouldn't be administrative.
I guess my feeling is we got a lot of things you have to do, and the probability of us turning, making our own tannery row is probably pretty low. We would focus on others personally.
I couldn't see that in our AMSEC area.
Also, we have in our code that if you have a mixed use project, we allow you to do a study to say if the parking should decrease. This is just kind of a way to check a box, but it's not really necessary.
Yeah, Katie and I have had some discussions about this, and I shared with her my perspective that's, I think, similar to Commissioner Estes, that, live work is probably not a housing type that's sort of really ideally suited to Capitola, and there might be some other alternative housing types, such as smaller units, that would be more appropriate. That said, it's still an allowed use. And so if somebody did decide, they really wanted to do a live work project in the mixed use zoning district, it's still a possibility under existing rules.
In terms of affordability, I remember going over when we were talking about the housing element before that the developers are beholden to a 50-year commitment. Is that correct? Am I remembering that right? Or is that not that completely
For
out of the-
affordable housing?
Yeah, if they're proposing intensified, density and height limits and all this stuff, they're only beholden to 50 years of providing affordable housing?
I believe it's 55 years or the life of the building. So it's longer.
So whatever comes first kind of thing.
I think a lot depends on their funding source.
Yeah.
That's curious. I'm just wondering if
Yeah. We updated that recently when we updated the inclusionary housing ordinance. We tried to align things, but a lot of it is tied back to funding sources. And I think now a lot of the loans are set further for the affordable. So
I don't want to waste time going deeper into it, but maybe I'll
an example of that is the Dakota Apartments. They're just about to hit their 30 years.
Mhm.
They're coming back in for a rehab project in which we'll get another 30 years of affordability by
Oh.
working with them on this rehab project. But a lot of those things are tied to the original development agreements for the developments that we have in Capitola currently.
Okay, so
New development is 55.
thank you.
And so I think to kind of summarize, I think some of the themes that we've heard so far. So interest in promoting employee workforce housing through community benefit programs, seems interest in that. Live work, maybe nothing's needed in the zoning code right now since it's already allowed. Micro units, some interest in defining that as a distinct use type and allowing that or encouraging it in certain locations, such as around the transit center.
Yeah, on that one, we didn't close on, should we allow that in RM?
Yes.
I think we should discuss that because that could be an incentive to populate more of our lots that are in the RM zones. If you relax the development standards.
I think it'll, depending on how high you go with the densities and your high density. But you could incentivize if you want even more because you allow micro units, that would be that next thing. So yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Micro belongs near transit. Micro is typically tied towards decreasing parking requirements because they're so small that usually you wouldn't have two people living in a
Mhm.
micro. So I think if we were to set up a true incentive for micros, it should be near our transit centers, so near the mall. If we were to go that direction, multifamily, maybe within a certain distance of Metro. There's quite a bit of multifamily north of Capitola Road.
Yeah.
That it
that's the
might
area
work.
I was thinking of along southwest, whatever, of Clare Street, between Clare's and Capitola Road, that area. Should be close to, or it is close to the new transit center. Wherever that thing gets designed.
I would like to see it located sort of tied into the transit center going into START. Doesn't mean we can't ultimately change it and say we want to have it in, the multi-residential zones. But right now, for me, I would want to start sort of in the mall area within a certain radius of the transit center, which would take in part of Capitola. I mean, you could take in part of Capitola Road. You could have, a distance from the transit center, not on the mall property.
Okay.
I agree.
I think we've already increased the density in RM, right? We talked about that in terms of the middle housing,
Mhm.
mid housing. So if we're already increasing density around Clear Street or allowing that, that's a step in that direction. And if we focus the micro housing just a closer, like Commissioner Westman's saying, closer to the transit center, then got it covered. It's right here.
I know,
No,
it's
I don't
here.
understand
It's the
why.
microphone's fault, not mine.
I think you're right. Um, so I'm hearing close to the transit center for now, increased densities in the multifamily zones. Okay.
there's
In terms of, do we go to SRO? Single room occupancy. So this is typically your group housing and it wouldn't count towards our arena. We don't think, I think it's you have to have a kitchen.
I'm not a big fan of the SROs right now in Capitola. I think, the micro housing would sort of fill that niche for us. I,
How, out of curiosity, how is the city attaining or getting RENA with the junior ADUs as are they counted towards RENA if people bring in like a detached and a junior? Because the junior ADUs don't necessarily need to have a full kitchen. They could have a very simplified, hot plate and that's counted. So I mean, if we're talking about an SRO they could have a hot plate potentially that's allowed. I mean, if it's not necessarily specified, I just don't understand why it wouldn't count towards that as in terms of a benefit and incentivize for cities.
Yeah, I guess we could draft it so it meets the requirement for arena, but it doesn't, I don't know if that,
I would
Really?
really research a little bit more because I think SRO is sometimes a broad term. There might be certain types of SROs that you can get counted. You can count, but maybe others not. So I might want to look into
It would just seem like a shame if we had a big development of SRO and then we didn't get anything for it. It seems kind of silly.
so we'll look into that. Okay. And co-housing, it's basically allowed. Do we want to spend some time on that or not really?
I don't see that we really need to. I don't know how much benefit you think we would get by listing it separately. I mean, if you think HCD is going to love it if we list it separately, then I don't care if you list it separately. But
Just don't think.
if you don't need to, don't.
Okay. Maybe we list it in like the definition of multifamily, including co-housing. So, yeah.
I think is essentially what the city of Santa Cruz. Okay. We ready to move on to the third topic? All right. So parking. So the housing element says a few things about parking. One of the things it says is that parking standards have the potential to constrain development or limit density on a site due to the cost of constructing parking facilities and space limitations. So on the screen here is a table of existing on-site parking requirements. And so for single-family dwellings, it ranges from 2 to 4 units, depending on the size of units. For ADUs and SB9 units, it's limited to 1 per unit under state law. For duplexes, 2 per unit, 1 covered, and for multi-family dwellings, 2.5 per unit, 1 covered. So existing on-site parking requirements for residential uses. Program 1.6 in the housing element says that the city's parking requirements for multifamily housing do not vary by size of the unit, potentially constraining the development of smaller units and discouraging higher density. And then the program says that the city will revise the multifamily residential parking requirement based on the unit size or number of bedrooms, and will also revise the current covered parking requirement for multifamily development. And it goes on to say to review and revise as appropriate parking requirements in general to remove constraints to housing, and then also to include reduced parking standards for senior and special need housing. Some of that is dictated by state law. So this past year, there were some new state laws adopted related to parking. The first one says that if there is an addition or a renovation to a single family home, cities cannot require additional on-site parking.
So this is new.
So this will affect Capitola. And then the other law is that there's certain types of shared parking. So shared parking means if you have, say, a commercial and a residential use on a site, that those uses share the parking because the parking demand occurs at different times of the day, like office and housing. Capitola currently has shared parking provisions in the code where the Planning Commission has the discretion to approve shared parking. What AB 894 says is that in certain circumstances, cities must allow shared parking if it meets certain criteria. So there's going to need to be, I think, a few small amendments to your shared parking provisions to address AB 894. So here is a table. Let's see if I can do this again. So here's a table showing what some of your neighboring communities require with on-site parking. So in Santa Cruz, the parking is dictated by the number of bedrooms. So 1 space per unit for a studio or 1 bedroom, and then 2 per unit for a 2+ bedroom. Scott,
What does that asterisk mean at the bottom?
that means
Eliminate
that
parking?
in Santa Cruz's housing element, that they make a statement that they aim to eliminate parking minimums citywide by January 2028. So City of Capitola, City of Santa Cruz says in its housing element that it wants to eliminate parking minimums within the next 5 years. And so this slide, I won't go through each one, but sort of gives a little bit of context of what other local cities are requiring in terms of their on-site parking for townhomes and multifamily.
So it seems like our choice is either to go size or bedrooms.
Yes.
Mhm.
Or you could be Santa Cruz and eliminate it.
Are they just hoping that it'll even itself out? Just that over the span of like just densifying and then it'll just be like, nah, everybody will figure it out. I mean,
It's interesting. So that state law that just came out that says if you do an addition to a home, so in the past, whenever someone does an addition to the home, we'd require, if it goes above a certain threshold of square feet, that they have to provide the parking, and that's by state law, we can no longer require additional parking. So really thinking about what do we want to tie these to so that we get parking spaces on the site. But you're seeing here, most of them are a maximum of 1 to 2 spaces other than Watsonville. So
and this is including in the coastal zone, that state law? Because I think for ADUs, we were saying that we still had to preserve 1 on-site parking spot within.
that's a great question.
Yeah,
and
I'll
I'll-
double check that. I didn't notice any coastal zone exemption, but we should double check.
Yeah, we'll double check.
Okay, thanks.
The trouble, if you go with bedrooms, then you have to decide what a bedroom is.
Exactly. I
I
was
think
thinking
our,
the same
our recommendation on this is to go by size, but don't have to worry about it.
Size makes sense to me.
So here's a table with some potential adjustments to the parking. We've highlighted the parking requirement for single-family dwellings because, I think because of the new state law, we're thinking it might be preferential to have just a 2 per unit requirement, regardless of size, to avoid people gaming the system. And then with ADUs and SB9s, that's all dictated by state law, so no change there, no change for duplexes. And then on multifamily, I think our recommendation would be to tie it to floor area rather than bedrooms, so you don't run into this problem of having to determine what's a bedroom and what's not. And the numbers that we have up here for us sort of feel about right, given what other communities are doing in the area. And, but that's, of course, open to sort of discussion.
Just out of curiosity, what's the rationale for requiring covered?
That's what I was gonna ask.
I don't think there's any good I don't think there's any good rationale for requiring covered. I think most covered parking in Capitola is not used for parking.
Unless it's in the flood zone, under the house.
Most cities do it for aesthetic reasons.
Um,
Hmm.
And we don't have a garage credit in terms of our standard design or our design standards. So it's, if we create a covered parking space, it takes away living space essentially, right?
Yeah, if there's a floor area for a small lot, there's an exception.
Oh,
A floor, like if you have a lot that's below a certain size, we give you additional floor area towards your garage. It's 250 square feet, I think, of garage space.
we could propose eliminating the required covered parking or.
Yeah, that, I would love that feedback tonight of whether or not you think it's appropriate to remove the covered parking standard. Oh, and a lot of this you end up seeing at the apartment buildings are these really long carports, and I don't know that they're really protecting the cars from
Right.
much other than falling trees, but
I could go with no covered parking requirement.
And then a
I
flat.
don't see a need for covered.
I agree.
I think this is a pretty good start, this chart up here for parking requirements, just eliminate the covered.
Mhm. And then just having a flat requirement for two spaces, uncovered, covered, whatever.
yeah.
For the
If
large.
you want to provide coverage, you can. If you don't,
And then for anything over 2,000 feet, we're just requiring two spaces.
I could live with it.
Seems,
over 2,000 or over,
well, 2,000,
26 or well, over 2,000, instead of being 3 spaces, 3 per unit, it'll just be 2 per unit.
yeah. So
And over 2,600, it'll just be, instead of 4 per unit, it'll just be 2 per unit.
I think that.
okay. Do you want to create something in the multifamily dwelling? We've got one per less than 500 square feet, I think for micro. And if micro is tied to transit, would you want to see it less than one space per
Micro's
unit?
tied to transit, yeah.
So a micro that's within a certain distance of transit could be a like 0.5.
0.5, isn't that what we had at 4401 Capitola, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how they.
That seems appropriate.
Also, there's a section in our code currently that I think that we could, I can't remember exactly, but it's, if you're within a certain proximity to a bus stop, you can reduce your parking requirement, or I can't remember how it said. It's been a while.
It's state law.
Mhm.
We talked about it a lot with the ADUs
Mhm.
and SB9, that if you're within a quarter mile of a high frequency transit, that you don't have to provide parking. There's, but
We don't have those.
we don't have high frequency.
Transit
Oh,
What's defined as high frequency?
Having
has to come.
intervals every
Minute.
15 minutes during peak periods.
But that's what Metro's doing right now.
Metro's headed there. They're,
Right, I
you
mean,
know,
they'll be-
They're trying.
They're
but They're
trying.
not there yet.
Well, I mean, their goal is this year.
Yeah, I thought they were going to get there this year at the mall.
we're expecting within this housing element, this next cycle for it to happen. And, you know, once they get the bus lane on the highway, I could see this getting us closer, but right now they're not quite there. So
I'll be shocked.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty highly publicized that that's their goal, to be there this year for 15 minutes.
So
I don't think they're even proposing that they will be that way at every bus stop. I think they're saying that at the transit center, they might meet that requirement, but not everybody's going to be within a quarter mile of the transit center.
Right.
You ask about bus stops, you know, the quarter mile from bus stops, but it's not going to happen a quarter mile from most bus stops.
well, and that brings me to what I think it came up with that application that was on 47th, the can't remember the name of it.
4401
Yes.
Cap Road.
Thank you. The people were asking like what, it doesn't mean, even though there's 0.5 parking spaces per unit that they're allowing, it doesn't guarantee that people aren't just gonna have, 3 cars that their name. I mean, that's not something we can necessarily control, but, is that something we can necessarily control? Nothing, no, just,
Yeah.
The landlord can control it on the site.
yeah.
The city can't control it other than making them move their cars around.
Right. So then that, I mean, are we going to, maybe it's a question for another day, just the regulation of parking up in those areas seems like even by Jade Street, it just seems so impacted all the time. But anyhow, thank you.
Have we reached consensus on this one?
Thank you for patience.
I think so.
I-
And then,
Sorry, but just to go back, so the 4401 Cap Road, the Planning Commission did ask us to bring up to our Public Works Director as well as City Council, making them aware that the Planning Commission is interested in looking at the avenues up there and relooking at how the parking's designed to possibly get more parking to fit. So I think that is something on our long list of improvement projects for Capitola. So that was heard during that review, and it's definitely on a list. Whether or not it becomes a priority in the next year or in 5 years is up to the city council. But yeah, you're welcome.
and so the housing element also calls for the city to make some adjustments to parking requirements for certain special needs housing types. And some of this is dictated by state law. I don't know if we need to sort of belabor it tonight, but on the table is sort of what we were thinking with senior housing to sort of distinguish between independent living and sort of elderly and long-term care in terms of what the parking requirement is to sort of tie it more to the nature of the use. Let's see, with group housing, 1 per unit, get rid of the guest space requirement. For residential care, 1 per 3 beds. For emergency shelters and transitional housing and religious institutional uses, these are parking requirements that are dictated by state law. So we would just follow what the requirement is for them. So again, we would bring this back to you. You could look at it at a future date with a finer tooth comb.
I will say for myself, as I go to a lot of these facilities, that is a hospice volunteer, and whether it's ages in Aptos, whether it's Pacific Manor here in Capitola, or almost any of them, the hardest thing is to find a place to park. I mean, you always end up as a volunteer parking in the neighborhood around it, because none of them have enough parking. So I do think these kinds of places need to have some provisions for, because there are always a lot of visitors there. But I know we have to follow state law now.
Just seems like a natural result of something I just can see coming. Big ominous car cloud.
Is it okay to move on from this? Okay. And then a few other little changes. We need to implement state law about the no additional parking for a remodel project. But if we're changing the single family parking requirement to 2, regardless of size, then we don't need to worry about that. And then also a few tweaks, I think, to the shared parking provisions pursuant to AB 894. Okay. All right. So the second to last topic before we talk about massing is lot consolidation. So I think, as you know, lot consolidation means if you have a development site with 2 or more lots as part of the development project, you reduce the lot, sometimes merging all of them together into one big lot so that the development becomes more feasible from a physical perspective, but also you then have it under single ownership. So development is facilitated due to that. So here's just an example of lot consolidation. So a project 4401 Capitola Road, there was 2 parcels As part of the development project, they merged those two parcels into one parcel for the entire development site to accommodate the development project. So the housing element addresses lot consolidation and calls for the city to develop incentives to encourage lot consolidation and identifies some strategies that might be used, such as ministerial approval of lot line adjustments and flexible development standards for large sites. So the housing element does go into some sort of depth in its discussion of the lot consolidation issues, particularly related to some of the sites, the non-vacant sites that are identified as opportunity sites. So here's the map of what the housing element calls a consolidated site analysis. So it identifies all of the sites where there are multiple parcels that are part of sort of a larger development opportunity site area. And some of them are under single ownership. In fact, most of them are under single ownership, but some of them are under of multiple owners. And I think the single ownership sites are fine. We don't need to worry about that. If the owner, as part of a development project, the owner will merge the parcels, and there's nothing the city really needs to do to encourage or incentivize that. I think it's in the cases where you have fragmented ownership of these contiguous parcels where there is a role for the city to come in and try to encourage or incentivize lot consolidation. And so there's really 3 of those areas right now that are identified in the housing element. There's on Bay Street, Zone CC. These 2 parcels are under different ownership. At the corner of 41st and Bromer, there are 3 parcels that have multiple owners that are identified opportunity sites. And then here, Capitola Avenue, just north of the Bay Avenue intersection, those are separate owners as well. So the question then becomes, okay, well, what can the city do to incentivize lot consolidation? And in its guidance to cities and their housing element, HCD identifies a number of tools, things like deferring fees, expediting permit processes, adjusting development standards, actually devoting financial resources to these projects, and other incentives such as increasing allowable density, lot coverage, and floor area ratio where lot consolidation occurs. So there are other tools that cities can use beyond what HCD identifies. Some cities will sort of designate specific areas where lot consolidation is either encouraged or required in some form. They're contributing financial resources to incentivize lot consolidation and maybe investing infrastructure improvements in certain areas. And some of these things fall outside of the zoning code, not really something for us to think about now, but others are tools that can be incorporated into the zoning regulations. So, I think to incentivize lot consolidation on opportunity sites where there's fragmented ownership, I think one of the things that the city can do in its zoning code is to sort of just allow increased intensity for a project that consolidates lots. Because I think that, to maximize the development potential of housing, including affordable housing on these sites with fragmented ownership, I think the city does want to see lot consolidation because more units will be possible. So what does that look like? So for example, in the MUN district for these 2 sites, without lot consolidation or any kind of community benefits, what's allowed currently is an FAR of 1 and a height of 27 feet. But if a project were to come in, say, with lot consolidation and community benefits to really maximize the development potential of this opportunity site, the city could say, okay, now you're allowed an FAR of 1.5 and additional height. That's how that might work. And then similarly on these other sites in the CC district, currently maximum FAR of 1.0 and height of 40 feet to incentivize lot consolidation. The city could say, okay, if you consolidate lots and you provide some degree of community benefits, you're allowed additional FAR of 1.5 and a height of 50. So,
These only for residential projects?
yeah, I would say so. I mean, that's the whole intent of this, is to maximize the development of these opportunity sites for housing and specifically for more affordable or attainable housing. I would think that, yes, that would be the case.
This is also, I should mention, one area that we're continuing to work on with HCD. They had concerns about the sites that aren't owned by the same folks. So we might have more information coming out to you in the next couple of weeks as our housing group is working on. This is one other area that we have to massage a little bit.
Like the non-vacant sites with multiple owners, I think HC is really kind of doubting the realistic development potential.
Yeah, there's a chance that we might actually remove these from our inventory if necessary because of their questioning how we're going to go about this. So as you saw, a lot of the incentives are like tied to money, which the city doesn't really, kind of got limited funds in order to help that way. But this is one idea but it would have to be tied to really strict standards of like producing the RENA on site, something like that in order to get that extra FAR in height.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. How would you write the code? Make it happen, right? Pretty hard.
Yeah. Sort of, we would identify qualifying projects with objective criteria, and I think sort of meeting certain.
Specifically call them out.
Yeah.
Like you called the potential hotels called that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So under the community benefits zone, we would have a separate section for lot consolidations with multiple property owners.
If it makes the state happy, it takes a few hours to write it up. Sure. I don't think it's going to happen.
I think you're right.
At a future time, though, of the next round of declared sites, if you got them to
Yeah,
do it over the next year.
we would check a box. Mhm. Okay, so general support for that? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, then our last topic. So, topic of massing. I think Katie asked me to focus on a couple of specific issues. So in the pre-2020 zoning code, before the major zoning code update was adopted in 2020, all covered open space areas below a roof eave, all covered open space and areas below a roof eave over 2 feet counted towards the FAR. With the zoning code update, that was changed so that these areas are now excluded from the FAR calculation. And so I think that the concern of this rule change, or a concern of this rule change, is that when you combine this with floodplain requirements to elevate living area, that's going to encourage top-heavy buildings, sort of maybe similar to the photographs that you see here. And Katie also asked planning commissioners to provide photos related to this topic of massing. Commissioner Wilkes submitted these photos, which we've included in the presentation. Another sort of narrowly focused issue related to massing is in the zoning code, interior area of a building with a floor to ceiling height of greater than 16 feet is counted twice in the floor area calculation is the rule. And I think, as you remember from the recent 605 Escalona project, there might be ways to kind of game this rule in a way that you enclose sort of a large roof truss in a way that keeps the floor to ceiling height less than 6 feet, but the visible massing of this building element is greater than 16 feet. So that may be a concern. So I think there's sort of two sort of targeted massing related amendments that we've been thinking related to these issues. One is to sort of go back to the old way of including covered open space and roof eave over 2 feet in the FAR calculation. Another would be to include in the FAR calculation areas with floor to rooftop height of greater than 16 feet, to count that twice, as opposed to ceiling height, which is the current rule. So that's it. So that's sort of all I had to say on the subject. Katie, do you have anything to add on the massing issue?
No, well, yeah, one thing to add, if we could go to that slide, just about the 2 feet overhang. So for architectural features, it is nice to have a nice roof overhang. It adds a lot to a building. Your typical craftsman has a really nice roof overhang. So maybe if two, but what we're seeing, we've seen a couple of examples where the image on the left, it's a really large roof overhang. It's not quite a carport. A carport would count. And so it's just, should that count? Does that add to the massing of the structure for you? In the past, we would have counted that. So that overhang, I'm going to say, is 8 to 10 feet on the there. And so in the past, we would have counted that, so you wouldn't have such a large projection coming out. And then
But if it was turned into a deck, how does that fit into it? Because then you have walls that go up and
yeah, so if it was turned into a deck,
no
it
definition of what is a roof overhang.
And also, I mean, all that space, if we're talking about floodplains, all that space beneath that, the 2 foot the greater than 2 foot overhang is virtually unusable. I mean, except for a carport, or commercial space. But I would think it'd be a shame to underutilize that area underneath. I mean, it doesn't seem to be a deck, because we have limitations on decks that would then limit your FAR. So, I mean, but like a green roof could be an overhang, like if they planted that whole thing. Just would seem to be a shame to limit that modulation from the street, taking advantage of all the floodplain area or the base flood elevation underneath.
yeah, so in your floodplain, I think you all are aware of this, but your conditioned space is limited. You can have a garage on the first floor, you can have commercial on the first floor, but in terms of living space, you have to get that space out of the floodplain. So we've seen some projects, actually the most recent approval across the street, the bedroom on the first floor was elevated, I want to say 2 feet to get it out of the floodplain. But in some circumstances closer to the river, your first story is really limited in terms of probably a garage for a future redevelopment or just storage area with no heat. And then once you get into the second story, so we will see as homes are redeveloped in the floodplains, people aren't going to want to put that much of their floor area into the first story. They're going to want to elevate it. And so I think the big question here is, that top heavy massing, do you want us to put more controls on it? Because right now we're cantilevers, we wouldn't count that towards the massing of the building.
So how do you define massing? It sounds like you're defining massing in terms of overhangs and ratio of first to second floor. To me, massing is like flat roofs with giant buildings that loom over your neighbors and, block the light from the neighborhood. And
It's building volume, I would say, in my view, the building volume on the upper story is greater than the building volume down below. And so I think I'm just confused, if you're not going to use the building volume on the upper story and you're in a floodplain, how do you utilize your living space except for building in a stack.
So you're saying that massing in your definition is using your floor area ratio up high as opposed to low?
Well, you can't really utilize the floor area ratio down below because there's no living space allowed within that flood area.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just trying to trying to get definitions here because
So is the question we're talking about now massing, or are we talking about just the floor air, how we calculate floor area ratio?
How we calculate floor area ratio relative to the 2 foot. Do we want to bring that back to avoid these scenarios where the second story is cantilevered over the first story?
I don't have a problem with the
Cantilever?
story. Can't leave it over the first story.
No, I mean, it's the only practical thing they can do, given they're in the floodplain, right? They want to get the living space.
I guess question, this is only in the floodplain we're talking?
No, this would apply citywide.
Right, so we're focusing on the floodplain, but then we could take this example up to Cliffwood Heights, right?
Yes. And in the floodplain, recently we approved a variance to floor area to allow a double garage for just this reason. It made sense to allow for a 2-car garage that didn't count towards the floor area, knowing that they needed the living space above.
I remember also with the old code when they had like porches, that was not necessarily cantilevered, but it was, it had posts with or without posts that would count towards the FAR. And that was a challenge to try and incorporate, amenable outdoor areas on the first level with overhangs that wouldn't count towards FAR. And so then just given the constraints of the small lots in Capitola, my opinion at least is conserving that FAR that we are allowed to distribute it amongst the bathrooms, the kitchens, the living spaces, the bedrooms, or every square inch is important in it. And eliminating those, whether it be, especially for just empty overhangs, I feel like the overhangs create architectural modulation and really add character depending, it could be modern, it can be craftsman, it can be traditional. It just adds character to every single house. And if you constrain that overhang, you're going to get these big block houses where they're just maximizing everything they can.
So can we be a little more fine-tuned and have regulations that are for the floodplain area? Because it seemed like on the house that we approved across the street, that, that was raising that elevation of the bedroom 2 feet. That was not really significant in a lot of, that happens in a lot of places. When you start talking about having a floodplain elevation that's 10 feet, then that's a whole different scenario than the majority of Capitola is in. There's really only a small area where the flood regulations are that significant. So I wonder if we can have, something that talks about homes that are in a floodplain area, and have rules for those that are different than what they are in other parts of town. Because I don't think you would want to see this applied like on Cliffwood Heights. Having sort of the top-heavy house up there, in that kind of neighborhood doesn't seem like it works.
Well, but it does cover porches, and porches are used a lot in a number of different design, Victorian style houses, craftsman style houses, and they're
Wraparound.
scattered all over the place. And that's supposed to be the unique culture of Capitola we're trying to preserve. So if we now force people to eliminate porches because they want living space, you are going to end up with a lot of Silicon Valley like block homes, in my opinion.
I
Right,
100%.
but I think we changed our zoning ordinance to allow people to have porches without counting it in the floor area ratio. Yeah, and so I think there are a lot of things we can do, when we start sort of trying to pass these rules that apply to the entire town because there's a problem with the houses that are in the floodplain, I don't think we're doing the whole community a real good service. It seems to me that we can be sophisticated enough that we can come up with regulations that deal with that specific problem. And then, we can talk about exactly how we want to calculate floor area ratios in, the rest of the community.
I would add to that, I do think the way in which that last application was reviewed and that we applied a variance is the correct way to utilize a variance. Variances are tied to the property
Right.
and the circumstances of the property. So this one, if we want to do something just tied to the floodplain, I believe the variance is actually the right tool for that, because you really do want to look at those properties instance by instance, rather than, I would worry that we would create just another issue by trying to draft up just for the floodplain.
Right.
We can look into it. We'll look into it and bring it back for discussion, but.
And I absolutely think you're correct. I think those people that are in the floodplain could be entitled to a variance because, the rules are that there's something unusual about, the size, shape, or topography of the lot and, not being able to build because of the topography in the floodplain is a valid reason for granting a variance in those situations.
We recently received a new application that also takes a similar approach of just leaving the garage on the first story and all the living will be on the second. So that'll be coming
Floodplain?
in the floodplain, in Riverview. So, and that one, the floodplain is much higher than what we saw across the street.
If this does come back around, I think showing a different, like, I understand the principle in showing these photos, those two, especially in terms of massing, but showing, like there's one for sale with a huge porch. There's another, just any type of entrance overhangs of different varieties and different architecture, I think is applicable to this. And I think communicating these types of buildings shows kind of a narrow view of this type of massing, because it could be applicable to, little portals going into homes of any variety.
Okay.
So can somebody explain what we're going to do?
So I'm hearing sort of a diversity of opinions on this issue, including the concern that going back to the old rule may discourage architectural features that create visual interest and is consistent with the Capitola character. And so I think what Katie and I will do is maybe explore some ways to sort of address this top-heavy building massing concern while also not discouraging these architectural features, and maybe bring something back that tries to do both of those things for further discussion.
Right, because I do like the idea of, front porches and some of those things not counting in the floor area ratio, because they do add to the character and style of the home. And I think we could come up with a legitimate list of those kinds of things.
The thing that, again, I'll bring it back, the thing that bothers me about the top-heavy buildings is the daylight planes for the neighbors, the specific ones on Capitola Avenue here, where there's, on Riverview, there's these tiny little bungalows, and all of a sudden there's these giant buildings looming over them, and they've lost all their light. It's like, what happened to my mornings? So I would think that we could do something in terms of daylight, like we have in the village, right? We have daylight planes. That's why we have roof,
I
roofs and
don't think our daylight plane was in our code when this one went through planning commission, but for the most recent application next door, we have the daylight plan. I'd have to go back and check, but I don't think because it's in the coastal zone, it didn't take effect until 2021. So yeah, this wasn't subject to the daylight plan. It'd be really interesting. We could actually come back and show you what the daylight plan, what would have been cut out of this if it were subject to that. But- So, because now we do have a standard that in mixed use neighborhood, if you're adjacent to residential, you have to have that daylight plan.
Good.
Yeah.
Also with the massing, the enclosed ceiling spaces that circumvent rule intent. I remember there was an application a while back with the Depot Hill, the 72-foot chimney and I can't remember, it was on Cliff. Anyway, their proposal, we granted a variance because they proposed dropping the ceiling down to mid-span of the double hung windows to meet that requirement. And I feel like it was such a silly proposal, but because after we met, when I was listening to all the different comments for this, the really high ceilings, I see the point. That's what I'm trying to say. Of the only thing that I think that this would be applicable, the disadvantage would be like a stairwell or something being counted, all the way to the top if you had some type of large area, top to bottom for climbing stairs. But you don't.
No, we don't.
We
double
changed
count
that.
You did. Okay, I'm sorry.
So I'm hearing that to sort of address this issue in some way, there's interest in doing that, and so we can put something together and bring it back to you.
Is there a downside in this? Is there any unanticipated consequences of changing roof height?
Might want to add a foot to it to accommodate the roof, in between, but otherwise, I think that was the intent there.
I was thinking about that a little bit and worried that maybe this would discourage pitched roofs in certain instances,
Cathedral-like roofs.
and maybe encourage flat roofs.
We have the standard that is in the village that we allow extra height for a pitched roof. We could come back with some form of that to
Yeah.
see if the planning commission's interested.
I mean, to Peter's point, we could just apply the same type of massing stipulation of the daylight plane we do, but it just seems like greater massing within the roof area could present the same problem, but in a different way.
Okay.
We'll come back with some additional ideas.
Okay. Well, we'll plan for what meeting we can get on next to bring more changes to you as we work through. I have a director's update for you. If we're ready to move into the next. Thank you for all your great comments this evening. Very helpful.
Are we going to talk about the other items we got in our agenda packet?
Not this evening.
I just have one minor comment. I think where there's something in here about a bar, I think we need to come up with a definition in our glossary of what a bar is and what we're talking about there, because that could be a wine bar, taco bar, a liquor bar, just a definition when we come back. Thank you.
Any other comments on the future list? Shall I jump into the director's report?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, I just have one update on the housing element update. So after the meeting we had 2 weeks ago, the direction that we could move to 75 feet on the mall site keep it at the mall site and allow the FAR to have an exception for parking garages. Took the same conversation to the city council. And while we were there, Merlone Geyer Representative David Gleiser stood up, and he also brought up a new aspect of this in that the number of affordable units placed on the mall is too high and a burden, and they don't see themselves redeveloping with I think there was like 460 affordable units just on the Merlone Geyer sites. So city council directed us to continue working with Merlone Geyer, and they also directed us to move forward with publishing an update to the housing element while working with Merlone Geyer. So I had a meeting today with Merlone Geyer, and I've had 2 meetings with our housing consultant. And at this point, we're thinking of kind of sharing the love amongst the whole mall site. Before, we didn't include the Target, we didn't include the Macy's site or the Ross site. So where we're going to increase the height to 75 feet for the whole mall parcel, we're doing the analysis of what 15%, our inclusionary ordinance requires 15%, what 15% spread over that whole site looks like. And that's, it's looking like it might work out, that we'll have enough on that side if we include the other parcels and not put such a heavy burden on the Merlone Geyer.
So I was very confused about that. I was watching that city council and you talked about that was a 419 units, or that sounds like way more than 15%, right? I mean,
It is, yeah.
so why is that such a huge number?
Yeah, it's the way that our consultant has been advising us through the process. And it's how, just based on the overall size of those lots and building, I think it was that we put in a density of 29 units per acre, which now with the 75 feet, it'll be 48 units per acre. So we're just trying to make the economics of this work as well. But to your point, it is high, the number. And when you have development projects come in, like 2 of our development projects this year are 100% affordable. And so as we see different projects come in, these numbers will balance out. We expect that we're going to have to utilize that additional buffer that we've been putting in the housing element for no net loss. So if Merlone Geyer were to come in tomorrow and they said, to make this feasible, we can only produce the 15% that's required by code, we would then use our we'd have to make no net loss findings and find additional sites in which that buffer could be used to say that we can still produce this housing somewhere else. So
I also got the sense that they weren't interested in increasing their numbers up to 1,300 units. Because the argument was that that's too many affordable units, 400 units, right? And so the ratio, it's the impression I got was the ratios were wrong. They needed more high-end units. And so they weren't willing, from what I could tell, to increase the total number of units up to as much as 1,300 units, which was something that a number that was bandied about. They didn't seem to jump on that. Was there any discussion about increasing the total number of units when you talked to them?
So when I talked to them, they said they think our math is correct now at 75 feet, 48 units per acre is what we'll be looking at. So they agreed with the math. They have not been working on our project. So they really haven't been they're not willing to go there in terms of like what numbers they're looking at. And we don't have a density limit there, but they're saying that they agree with our assessment with ground floor commercial and then living space above, 5 stories of living space above.
Yeah, in the model I sent you before, I updated it to include the higher roof height, and they can get 1,289 units with a FAR of 2.0, and that ends up at a density of only 25 per acre. And they should be able to afford. They should have plenty of market rate units to offset the affordable housing.
Yes.
I don't
yeah.
quite get their argument.
Oh, to only provide the 15%.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. The math does, to me, the math works in their favor as now that we've raised the height and taken the parking out of the FAR calculation. And you still will stay within the 2.0 FAR. You guys should be happy.
Mhm.
My calculations, but I don't know. I'm just trying. I'll send you this new model and you can
Okay.
look at it.
Thank you. Yeah. So that's, I'm hoping to have the updated housing element published on the Friday before our next meeting, and then I'll bring an update to you at the next meeting in March. And that concludes my director's report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can we ask? I do have a question about the wharf, if I'm allowed.
Commission comments?
So now that we're gonna demolish the bait shop and the restaurant, there's not like, what are we just gonna deck over top of what's there now or leave a hole? I mean, how, I'm not sure how that works. Because the construction company has plans that include those two buildings.
So with the demolition of the building, the deck will definitely be replaced. Before that, we were doing some of the pilings were being fixed underneath the buildings. This will actually give us really good access, and we can repair more of the pilings underneath the buildings. In terms of, we'll definitely run the utilities out there for future use. There's been no decisions on what happens next. There's discussion on whether or not the bathroom should, the Portland Loo, should it be installed at this point? And I think that's part of what these, the town hall discussion next week, just to get feedback, and then city council will make the ultimate decision. But at this point, you should expect to see a flat deck all the way out to its where it was planned to be built. And it's in really bad condition right now because we lost so many more of the boards in this last storm too on the front of the wharf. So but the utilities will be run.
The bathroom wasn't that a condition of state funding?
So that, I think right now with that bathroom, I know Jessica's doing a lot of research to see exactly what can happen with that bathroom and due to what's.
That was conveyed to us, and that was like really a hinge point for state funding. Like, and it was like when we were talking about how some of the feedback from the community was about the bathroom having to be there and the type, I thought it was pretty clear stated that it was really connected back to how the funding was set up for the wharf, and that it would jeopardize if that wasn't put out there. So do I.
Yeah, yep.
But we're gonna get a rebate from the construction company because it's a lot easier with those buildings gone to do this project, right?
Yeah.
If I were negotiating this contract and I was a commercial operation, that's what I would ask. You guys bid this thing with those buildings in your way while you replace pylons underneath. Now you have full access. It's gonna take you a fraction of the time. Give me some money. Or
No,
give me something else.
the cost of the new pilings versus doing the sleeve is less, so there will be a cost savings there. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the bathroom conversation, just to go back, I think that was tied to the state contract. I don't know if it was, I think it was already bid that way with a bathroom out there and had to be followed. So I think we're working through all of that currently under the new circumstances, but.
Maybe that could just be, we're gonna get a wharf update, sounds like in March, right? So
Yes, and we'll be bringing the other bathroom, the Exelu, was delivered. We'll be bringing some other options for you in terms of colors and possibly materials.
but in the new wharf design, I guess with the potential that the bathroom, the buildings won't be there. Jessica, I guess will research and give us an update. Is that bathroom, I mean, there's concerns about that bathroom being out there, but we thought it was gonna be pretty sheltered. from other buildings from a viewing standpoint. If there's nothing out there and there's just one single stall, might be more.
That's right.
Well, maybe she could update that. Thought it was pretty clear. Maybe it was Kayla, she might even know that it was really much. It had to go there because it was really based on the funding from the state that it was part of the project. So maybe that can be alleviated because of the storm damage or something.
We will see. I'll look into that.
All right, thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions? No? All right, then we're adjourned. Thank you. We're adjourned to the next regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission on March 7th, 2024 at 6 p.m. Thank you.